It's August 28th here in Seoul, and I'm Kim Dami. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour, starting with the first samples of seawater collected by Japan's Environment Ministry. The seawater radiation levels are below detectable limits of Japan, 4 days after the country started to release Fukushima wastewater into the Pacific Ocean. 3 South Korean nuclear safety experts are in Japan to monitor the release. South Korean badminton player An Se-young has won the women's singles title at the Badminton World Championships, becoming the first South Korean to do so in the World Championships' 46-year history. Russian investigators say genetic tests confirm Wagner Group chief Yevgeny Prigozhin did die in a recent plane crash, with no comment given on the cause of the crash. We start over in Japan. No detectable radioactivity has been found in the samples of seawater collected near the Fukushima power plant since Japan started to release the wastewater into the Pacific Ocean last Thursday. Our Lee Soo-jin leads us this morning.
Amid concerns over the discharge of Fukushima wastewater, test samples continue to show that the seawater near the Fukushima nuclear plant is safe. Japan's Environment Ministry announced on Sunday that tests conducted days after authorities began releasing treated wastewater into the Pacific Ocean did not show any radioactivity. The ministry's tests of samples from 11 points within 40 kilometers of the Fukushima plant showed that the low concentrations of tritium detected would not have any adverse impact on people or the environment. Japan began discharging wastewater from the Fukushima plant on Thursday, sparking anxiety across neighboring nations such as South Korea and China. Japan, however, has continuously emphasized that the water, which has been diluted to remove almost all radioactive elements except for tritium, is safe. Tritium, a radioactive element of hydrogen, can't be completely removed from the wastewater with the current technology, but it has been diluted to fall well within regulatory limits. An official from the ministry also said that it will publish test results each week for the next 3 months. South Korea's Oceans Ministry also conducted its own tests based on samples from 15 points in 3 areas of South Korea's waters just 1 day after the start of the discharge. The ministry announced on Sunday that the tests showed that radiation levels were well within the World Health Organization's basic standards for drinking water. The experts dispatched by South Korea to examine the discharge also arrived in Japan on Sunday. The 3 experts from the Korea Institute of Nuclear Safety plan to visit the Fukushima office of the International Atomic Energy Agency. This is part of the agreement made earlier between Seoul, Tokyo, and the IAEA to dispatch South Korean experts to the IAEA office every 2 weeks to monitor the release of the wastewater. The South Korean government also emphasized that it will continue to be vigilant and ensure that the discharge of the nuclear wastewater remains safe. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
Phase 2 of the Ulchi Freedom Shield joint military exercise between South Korea and the U.S. begins today. The second phase will run for 4 days from Monday to Thursday and will involve the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine Corps of both countries. Pundits say it's highly likely that the U.S. will also deploy strategic assets such as the B-1B strategic bomber during this exercise. The first phase of the UFS began last Monday and was integrated with a government drill to check the ability to respond to a full-out war in the country. North Korea has announced that it will now allow its citizens abroad to come back home as its border officially reopens after over 3 years of pandemic closure. For more, we're joined by Stephen Norper this morning. Welcome back to the program.
Thank you. Great to be back.
Sure. So North Korea is now relaxing the borders for the first time since, I remember, 2020. Why do you think the North made the decision now? Is it because the pandemic is over?
Well, the KCNA announcement was that they feel that at a global level, they've determined that the pandemic is over, and so that makes it safe for North Koreans to return. But it's an important development because it allows North Koreans back, and hopefully it allows aid workers, international organizations, the United Nations, the foreign missions back into the country as well.
Sure. Now, the thing is, North Korean citizens are given up to 3 years to stay abroad generally, meaning some North Koreans have stayed overseas for up to 6 years. Now, what kind of problems has this situation caused both at home and abroad?
Well, reports are that it created some difficulty in terms of both remittances back, which were difficult to do, if at all. And secondly, it meant that people were essentially left stranded outside the country. So this is an important development in terms of being able to reunite some of those who are working abroad with their families back home in the DPRK. And it's important in terms of opening channels of communications. The more flights we have, and they've just started, and the more communication across from DPRK out is a good thing because it opens the international lens on North Korea, and it allows North Korea to express itself and communication channels to be more open.
Definitely, the North has been secluded more than ever during the past 3 years. Now, the regime is permitting the return of people who are not able to come back home because of the virus. So diplomats and students will be able to come back home finally. Then when will North Korea actually allow non-citizens to enter the regime? I mean, will there be specific preconditions?
Well, it's an important question, and it's one that needs to be a next step. So most returning North Korean citizens will be in some sort of quarantine or observation for 1 week. But it would be great to see that open to outsiders and to allow foreign visitors. There just, of course, has been a visit in by senior delegations from Russia and from China, which is a good sign in terms of allowing outsiders. But it would be important to allow aid workers back in. And it would be very important to allow foreign diplomats and representatives of the United Nations who play a very important role in terms of communications and also in terms of development assistance back in the country.
Definitely. You mentioned earlier the reopening will give us a lens to this secluded region. Now, is there any chance that the North will actually return to the international diplomacy with the latest decision? Possibly something with the U.S.? What do you think?
Well, that's the aspiration, and certainly tensions are high on and around the peninsula. North Korea has objected to the exercises taking place now. There's the concern about the increase of DPRK missile tests, and the Hwasong-18 shows an ICBM capability that has become more defined. And so with that level of tension rising, it's imperative to be back at the negotiation table. So by allowing transport in and out and by the communications that flow from that, hopefully we'll see a resumption of dialogue, very much needed for peace and security around the peninsula.
Then will that resumption of dialogue include the possible return of the U.S. soldier Travis King, who defected to North Korea last month?
Well, at this point, they've simply acknowledged his presence there. They've had statements about his concerns of treatment, and there is communication between the United Nations Command and the KPA, the Korean People's Army, about his presence. So we'll have to wait and see what happens, whether he's returned, whether he chooses to remain. But one way or another, that's one aspect. What's more important is, given the security concerns with missile testing, potentially with a nuclear test to come, that there be real talks between the international community and the DPRK. So again, getting international diplomats in, using the imprimatur of the United Nations, trying to open channels for humanitarian assistance, which will be much needed after being closed off for 3 years.
Sure. President Norbert, North Korea is really making its out to the international venue with the participation in the Hangzhou Asian Games next month, right? Now, will the reopening of its borders make interactions even more active between the high-ranking officials of North Korea and China?
Well, one would hope so, because that communication channel is very important. Of course, the DPRK relies on the PRC for a great deal of its trade. It has already opened and had this exchange with the senior Russian delegation. So clearly, Pyongyang is opening relations with Moscow and with Beijing first. There are suggestions that there's a potential visit by the DPRK leader to the Russian Federation that may be in the offing. But in terms of the sports games, sports diplomacy is very important. It's a confidence builder. It's low political risk. We saw the benefits of it around the Pyeongchang Games in terms of DPRK participation. So participation in the games there would be important just to show that the DPRK is on the path of opening and that some of the recent activity leads to fuller diplomacy abroad. And again, eventually a return to the negotiating table.
Right, definitely. Now, North Korea is making its out to the Hangzhou Asian Games. Now, what other global events do you think we should pay special attention to with the North expected to make its participation?
Well, I would look at where the DPRK is going, not only in terms of things like sports and cultural diplomacy, but where it begins to open, in particular around the European Union. It may choose to move there before it makes movement on larger fronts with places like the United States. So I think looking for low-level signs, mid-level diplomacy is very important because the DPRK is certainly in need of strategic diversification. After 3 years of being cut off, they're going to be looking for inputs, economic assistance, humanitarian aid, and so there are a number of international players who can come in that regard. And again, essential to have representation on the ground, and that's why moving beyond just DPRK citizens returning, but really to foreign diplomats and to United Nations personnel is essential.
Definitely. Thanks so much for joining us from Hawaii this morning. You enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Aloha, and thank you for having me.
Russian investigators say genetic tests have confirmed the death of Russian mercenary group leader Yevgeny Prigozhin. Now, the Kremlin denies Western speculation that Russian President Vladimir Putin is behind the plane crash that he died in. Lee Young-eun has the latest.
Russia's investigators had confirmed that Wagner chief Yevgeny Prigozhin died in a plane crash, completing the genetic tests on those on board the private jet that crashed last Wednesday. Russia's aviation agency concluded that Prigozhin and Dmitry Okhin, his right-hand man, were among those on board.
As part of the investigation into the plane crash in the Tver region, molecular genetic examinations have been completed. According to the results, the identities of all 10 dead were established. They correspond to the list stated on the flight sheet.
The plane crash came 2 months after Prigozhin led a failed mutiny against the Russian army's top brass. Russian President Vladimir Putin initially vowed to crush mutiny, calling a stab in the back that could potentially trigger a civil war in Russia. But hours later, a deal came to allow Prigozhin to go into exile in Belarus. After the plane crash, Putin sent his condolences to the families of those who died. Meanwhile, Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko, who brokered the exile deal, said on Friday that he warned Prigozhin to watch out for possible threats, and he insisted that Wagner fighters will remain in Belarus. But Prigozhin had twice dismissed the warnings.
The second time when he visited me with Dima Utkin, I strongly warned them, lads, you watch out.
However, Lukashenko said that he believed Putin had nothing to do with the plane crash. The Kremlin said on Friday that Western suggestions that Prigozhin had been killed on its orders were an absolute lie. Lee Young-eun, Arirang News.
South Korean badminton star An Se-young claimed the women's singles title in Denmark on Sunday. And it's not just her. South Korea had a successful run at the World Championships, finishing with 3 gold medals and 1 bronze medal. Lee Seung-jae reports.
World number 1 An Se-young won her very first career world title at the 2023 World Badminton Federation World Championships in Denmark on Sunday, when she defeated world number 6 Carolina Marin of Spain 21-12, 21-10 in the women's singles finals. The 21-year-old also made history as she became the first South Korean to win a women's singles title in the World Championships' 46-year history. The top-ranked badminton star has had a remarkable season this year, having won a total of 8 international titles, including the most recent World Championships. An is one of the favorites to win the gold medal at the upcoming Hangzhou Asian Games, set to begin on September 23rd. In what many watchers have called the golden generation of South Korean badminton, the country's badminton players dominated at the World Championships, finishing with a total of 3 gold medals and 1 bronze. Over in the men's doubles, Kang Min-hyuk and Seo Seung-jae defeated a Danish pair to win the country's first men's doubles world title in 9 years. Seo Seung-jae earlier in the championships had won mixed doubles gold, having paired with Chae Yu-jung to stun the world #1 pairing and defending champions Zheng Shiwei and Hwang Ya-chung from China. The two became the first South Korean mixed pair to win a world championship gold in 20 years. In other events, Kim So-young and Kong Hee-young won the women's doubles bronze after defeating a Thai pair on Friday in straight sets. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
The elderly population is growing very quickly, and with more elderly people living alone, the demand for care services is on the rise. And here's an AI phone companion service where an AI agent checks in on the elderly and alerts welfare services in any case of distress. Lee In-jin has the story.
Mr. Beck is 78 years old. Someone calls him to ask if he slept well and is eating his meals. It's as if it's his granddaughter calling to check in on him.
식사는 잘 챙겨 드시고 계세요?
예, 오늘 점심도 잘 먹었어요.
요즘 어떻게 지내세요?
그냥 하루하루 그냥 시간은 잘 가요.
On the other end of the phone is actually an artificial intelligence companion. And the two have a conversation like this once a week.
I feel like if this develops further, it could really be another friend.
Gyeonggi-do Province has started this elderly companion service for seniors who live alone. The generative AI companion uses large-scale language models like ChatGPT to make deeper, more involved conversations possible.
I didn't know it was a robot calling. It's comforting to get a call like that.
During these conversations, if there are any distress signals like expressions of depression, loneliness, or difficulty living, the AI detects the situation as a sign of crisis and alerts the emergency welfare call center, prompting a real person to check in. Also, in the event of 3 attempts of unanswered calls, welfare service staff step in to make direct contact. Should those calls also be unanswered, welfare service representatives from local municipalities will visit the residents.
The elderly population in Gyeonggi-do Province is surpassing 2 million. Every year, this number increases by at least 200,000. It's difficult to keep up with a personalized care service.
In this day of a rapidly aging population, demand for such personalized care services is growing, which has brought great attention to the capabilities of such AI companion services. Lee In-jin, Arirang News.
Good morning, I'm Matthew Ashley, and we now turn over to stories from around the world. We begin in the U.S. state of Florida, where 3 people were shot and killed by a white gunman in what police are calling a racially motivated attack. Now, authorities on Sunday said Saturday's attack was carried out by 21-year-old Ryan Palmiter, who also died after shooting himself. The attack began when Palmiter, who was armed with an AR-15 style rifle and a handgun and wore a tactical vest and face mask, shot 11 rounds at a woman in her car, this outside a Dollar General store in Jacksonville. He then entered the shop where he killed another 2 people. Palmiter had earlier tried to enter a historically black university campus before carrying out the shooting. But he was turned away for refusing to identify himself to campus security. Police added that Palmiter had written multiple manifestos expressing his hatred of black people. He had no previous criminal history and obtained the firearms legally. Now, in Niger, thousands gathered in the capital Niamey on Sunday to support the country's military junta and called for the withdrawal of French troops. The protests took place just hours before the expiration of a 48-hour deadline given to the French ambassador to leave the country. According to Niger's junta-appointed foreign ministry, French Ambassador Sylvain Ut had his credentials withdrawn on Friday for reasons including refusing to attend a meeting with Niger's new foreign minister. But France's foreign ministry has rejected the demand, saying that only legitimately elected officials may rule on Ut's credentials. Tensions between Niger and its former colonial ruler, France, have ratcheted up since a military coup in late July that saw democratically elected Mohamed Bazoum ousted from power. 4 astronauts from 4 different nations have successfully boarded the International Space Station. Hailing from the United States, Denmark, Japan and Russia, the crew flying aboard a SpaceX Crew 7 Dragon capsule docked with the space station on Sunday. They will replace another 4-member team and spend the next 6 months in orbit. The crew blasted off from Kennedy Space Center on Saturday for a 30-hour journey to the station. It is the first time that a US-based spacecraft launch had all available seats taken by different nationalities. And finally, thousands of redheads from around the world descended upon the Dutch town of Tilburg over the weekend for a 3-day festival celebrating their hair color. Called the Redhead Days Festival, the annual event offered everything from painting workshops to skincare routines, photo shoots and speed meet events. Organizers say some 5,000 people attended the event this year. It got its start in 2005 when 150 redheads applied to be models after seeing an ad placed by an amateur painter. Now, the painter gathered all the applicants for a group photo and then decided to make an annual event of it. Only 1 or 2% of the world's population, typically of Northwest European ancestry, have red hair.
Good morning. We need to keep an umbrella handy this week with rain following a sunny weekend. Northern central areas and parts of Jeollanam-do province are being soaked this morning with a heavy rain advisory being issued in parts of Jeollanam-do province. And these rain clouds will gradually expand nationwide. And until tomorrow, west of Gangwon-do and the south coast could see more than 100 millimeters of heavy downpours. In the capital area in Chungcheong-namdo province could see up to 80 millimeters. Rain will come down harder tomorrow and continue into Wednesday. Central regions will get heat relief along with the showers, and certain parts of the country will remain hot with a heat advisory remaining in place, and afternoon highs will be hovering above 30 degrees Celsius this afternoon. Busan will not be affected by rain today. The port city will be under mostly sunny skies at a high of 31 degrees Celsius. Meanwhile, Seoul will be topping out at just 26 degrees. Those on Jeju Island will see rain all through the week. Then we could be indirectly affected by a typhoon at the end of the week. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
We thank you for watching New Day at Arirang. We'll be back tomorrow for Tuesday's edition at the same time, 9 a.m. Korea time.